All right. So if you want to make your brand really stand out, product packaging is one way to do that, to really wow your customers. So to share some best practices on product packaging with real world data behind it, I'm super excited to have Anthony Cofrancesco from PickFu to talk about product packaging and how you can give yourself and your brand the best possible look.
Amazing. Thanks, Kevin. I'm really excited. I'm going to jump right in here with sharing some slides. This is going to be best practices for product packaging. I'm just going to give you a real quick essential framework and then walk you through how theoretically you can use PickFu. And a lot of our customers have used PickFu to get some really cool results. So the first thing I'm going to do is start with essential framework. This is kind of like, what is product packaging in and of itself? And so obviously everyone knows this. Packaging is one of the most important parts of your product. A few things that make packaging really unique and really important is that obviously it's going to increase your production costs. As you spend more money on product packaging, your cost of goods are going to go up. The other thing with product packaging is that it's really difficult to change. So this is something you want to get right from the beginning, or as soon to the beginning as possible, because when you're going through and changing your product packaging, there's a lot of costs, there's a lot of labor involved. But most importantly, the reason product packaging is essential is because it's going to communicate really crucial information about your product itself. And we're going to walk into that today. A few things that's really unique about product packaging as well from an FBA specific standpoint is that number one, it's about the visual appeal of your product. So in a lot of scenarios, your product packaging can be the product itself, especially if you're selling something like supplements. When we were talking earlier about it conveying that really important information, your main image is not allowed to have any text in the main image, but product packaging is a really clever way to get around that. And so with communicating that really important information, you can do so right from your main image using your product packaging. And then it's also one of the requirements for brand registry is actually having product packaging in addition to a trademark and a website. So really something you want to get right. Basically what we've seen in terms of best practices, in terms of how you want to lay out your product packaging itself, is on the front, you really want to showcase kind of what is the product. This works very, very well on the digital shelf on the first page of search results. You really want to show what is the product, right? In simple words. This is a clever way of getting around the Amazon terms of service for no text. Here we're looking at a bamboo wooden watch. On the side of the product, you want to have the visualization or support. Right. So this can be for more complicated products. It can be like the nutrition facts, ingredients, things like that. For more simple products, it can literally be a picture of the product itself. On the back of the product is where you want to reserve the technical information. And so these are the things that most people probably aren't going to read, or they're going to be better supported with your infographics or your A+ content down below. And then on the inside of the packaging, what we recommend is if you can afford it, this is a cool thing about going to different packaging expos is you can go and ask them and ask your suppliers how much it actually costs to print inside of the box. But we recommend inside putting something surprising. So for just a couple extra cents extra, you can put some really cool branding messages. You can, do different calls to action in regards to brands or even cross-sell your product with something surprising. We're not going to talk about product inserts, but that is a whole other ball game. Maybe we'll come back for another video at some point. So a few different ways, if you're thinking about, okay, I know I need to have good product packaging. What are the ways that you can actually improve your product packaging? And so it comes down to really three main ways. You can do design, you can do functionality, or you can do information. And so design changes are probably the most valuable that you can do, especially in an e-commerce environment. We did a really great case study with a company that a lot of people know of called Thrasio. They acquired this brand Angry Orange for $2 million, and they used PickFu to do a whole bunch of PickFu tests, test a bunch of different concepts for product packaging, and then change their product packaging to this and grew that brand from $2 to $20 million in sales. And so we're going to walk through some of those changes in just a little bit at the end of the presentation. And so this would be an example of a design change, right? So all they're doing is it's still basically all the same information. They're just changing the way it's laid out. They're changing the visual aesthetic, and they're changing the way that the information is presented. A functionality change would be to make the product actually easier to use, or to make sure that it arrives safely, make sure that it doesn't get broken. For some products, this is obviously not going to be reasonable. A good example of this is going from the ketchup bottle, right? Designing the product versus designing the experience. So if you've ever used a glass ketchup bottle, you know how hard it is, you're hitting it, it's not squeezing out easy, versus switching to the flexible squeeze ketchup bottle, and as well where the cap is on the bottom. So the gravity is always going to keep pulling ketchup to the bottom rather than the opposite of that, which doesn't really make so much sense. An information change is going to help communicate really important information on the packaging much more clear. And so these are both different examples of a pore strip. This is for an acne treatment, right? You could have all text-based or you could have image-based. This is going to be time and time again, and we've tested this with PickFu. The brain is going to be is just a giant graphics processor, and so the more visually oriented you can make your product packaging, obviously that's going to be a big win. So, you know, a big question we get about product packaging is like, what's the best way to actually go ahead and get it done? It's really simple and straightforward. You can pretty much anyone who manufactures your product, you're going to be able to go to them and say, hey, can you set me up with a supplier for product packaging? Sometimes they won't do it in-house, but they will usually have quite good connections for that. The other thing I recommend is going, if you can, there's different packaging expos like at Global Sources. You can actually go meet different packaging suppliers. And so for me personally, I didn't even realize all of the different packaging options that were out there. Your supplier is going to have very limited ideas of what's out there, but there's an infinite number of complexity that you can do for packaging. So basically what you're going to want to do is have your designer design the die cut of the product, which is just a 2D representation of a three-dimensional object, coordinate with your manufacturer, and then set up the printing and packing. Just a few Amazon specific rules for product packaging. Obviously it has to be self-contained, right? So anything like this where the product is going to fall out of the cardboard sleeve is not allowed. You have to have that in some kind of poly bag. It needs to be scannable. Obviously this is super important. You need to have the correct set labeling. This is really important so that things don't get misidentified if you're selling in multi-packs. And then there's a whole TOS requirements for safety warnings on certain items around suffocation, around bags. And so really dive into that and make sure that the items that you send in, again, when you send something into Amazon, when you do your product packaging, it's something that you want to get right the first time. So make sure you have the correct labelings and warnings on it. The last tip that I'll give is around 3D renders. And so if your product is product packaging, like, so if it's supplements, if it's a consumer packaged good, a 3D render is almost always going to look better than a real photographed image. And this also allows you to start doing things like you can start doing things related to your product packaging before the packaging is actually even done. So you can start to assemble your images. You can start to create infographics and A+ content. So that's just a helpful little hack. I want to go back to this example real quick in terms of how we did a Thrasio case study with in regards to product packaging. And this is a little bit more of like how you can use PickFu to optimize your product packaging. And so when you look at this image here on the left-hand side, a lot of people say, well, like, of course, this option does much better. They must have just, you know, they came up with this option and that was it, right? But that's not quite what happened. When you're designing your product packaging, I think a lot of people just say, they go to their designer and they say, make me one version of the product packaging. But in reality, what the most successful companies are doing is they're coming through many, many different variations, and they're trying to identify what are the most important aspects of that product packaging that should be front and center. That if someone sees this from the first page of search results, or they're looking at the image up close, what are the most important, I call them elements. And so what Thrasio did in this case study is they look through and they say, okay, we want to have oranges, right? We want to have our brand Angry Orange. We want to have the words odor eliminator. And they're figuring out like, okay, what works, what doesn't work, and how can we go through a bunch of different variations to end up here in the end. And so what I recommend on your product packaging is really ask yourself and be very critical. Every single pixel, every single element that's on the product packaging, ask yourself, why is this here? And what is this doing to convey really important visual messaging to the customer, right? And so if you compare this, you're like, what is this font, right? What is this sad orange looking thing? And why is this font curved? And why is this, you know, small? And what is all of this text down here that I can't even read? Versus here, if you start looking at what actually did work, the feedback from the customers were that the brand name actually didn't need to be as big, that the words odor eliminator, what the product actually does, should be much larger. It should be the first thing you see. That this is a pet deodorizer. So having the illustration of the dog and the cat here is incredibly effective. And so just things like that, right? Trying to go from not just saying we're going to design one product packaging, but having many different versions, testing until you get to the final optimized design. And so that's what we'll do here for product packaging today. I recommend using the code MAXECOM, where you can go to pickfood.com/MAXECOM and you'll get 50% off your first test. And come back next time. We'll have another video, which you can click up above, and we'll actually do a live PickFood demo just around product packaging and really analyze those results.
So people will be able to click the little box right here and it'll be taken to that video where they can check it out. So thank you so much, Anthony.
Cool.